Hey friends, it's Maria, and today I wanted to talk to you about the latest and greatest from the government. Yay! So every 5 years, the USDA comes out with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and I'm looking at it on my screen, and I'll share what it looks like as well. And I just wanted to share my thoughts. And that is just that. It is my thoughts based on my own experience with nutrition, based on me working with nutrition clients in a clinical setting for several years, and now with running my own business and working with clients on nutrition as well. Okay, so here it is, the latest and greatest, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And what it is, it's the inverted pyramid. As you can see, there's proteins, dairy, and healthy fats at the top, as well as vegetables and fruits. And we've got some miscellaneous things at the bottom, and including grains at the very bottom of the inverted pyramid. And I mean, looking at it on the surface, it is all whole, nutrient-dense food. It is real food. It is ingredients. On the surface, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's sort of helpful. It's sort of helpful. You can kind of see what the different things are. But I will say that my partner actually said, it was like, it looks like it was made by a 12-year-old. This came from the government. I think my plate and any other variation of the food pyramid is kind of similar. And I don't think this is anything particularly groundbreaking in terms of their format, because the whole nutrient-dense foods, they have always been part of the original food pyramid or the My Plate. The differences here is, of course, the types of foods and in which quantities they're recommended to be consumed. We can see here that they really emphasize protein right here, which has a steak, cheese, maybe ground beef, maybe turkey, I'm not really sure. There's a chicken, whole milk, yogurt, salmon, eggs, tuna, shrimp, walnuts, almonds. I think this is rice and beans, peanuts, butter, avocados, potatoes, tropical fruit here, berries. Then we have some squashes, and going back up, we've got leafy greens, root vegetables, and cruciferous veggies as well, and other non-starchy veg. And I do appreciate the fact that they've included some like frozen peas and canned green beans, because the reality is that there's quite a few Americans that live in food deserts, and fresh food is not available. And also, fresh food might not always be the most cost-effective option for a lot of people. So buying frozen or canned is a really good way to kind of balance that out, and a really great recommendation. So I do appreciate that. And of course, at the bottom, we have oats, rice, maybe? Or maybe that's oats, and like a sourdough loaf. If we were to scroll down the document, it does emphasize that the message is simple: eat real food. It kind of goes over the statistics of how the Americans are sick. The big majority of us are not doing well from a metabolic health standpoint, and that is very accurate. And then it has general recommendations that I find are not particularly helpful. So if we look at this, it says eat the right amount for you. Eat the calories you need will depend on your age, sex, height, weight, and level of physical activity. Yes, but how do you determine that? How do you know what's appropriate for you? Pay attention to portion sizes, particularly for food and beverages higher in calories. Again, what does that mean? There's no helpful information on how to read a food label. And there's nothing about what ingredients to actually watch out for on packaged foods. It also talks about hydration was a key factor to overall health, which is choosing water and sweetened beverages is helpful. What are some things to consider? like folks that live at higher altitude, folks that work in the heat or have labor intensive jobs, folks that sweat a lot in general, live in a hotter climate, the aging population. It doesn't really address that. And just as like a tip here, for hydration, the best proxy for like knowing what level of hydration you should be at is your urine color. If it's too dark, it's time to drink up. If it's 100% clear, it's time to like back off the fluids because you could be diluting your electrolytes. So like a light yellow straw color is what we want to aim for. And if you're going up in elevation, if you're exercising a lot, if you're just thirsty, drink more. Then it talks about protein at every meal. Great, love this recommendation. I love protein. I'm all about the protein. But the protein recommendations aren't like that awesome. I think they're under shooting a little bit here, because at 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, I think that can lead people to eating either too much protein or too little protein, depending on where they're at. I'm personally a fan of the recommendation of 0.8 grams to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of ideal or maintenance body weight. So for me, as somebody that sits anywhere between 135 to 140, I'm shooting for like 130 to 140 grams of protein daily. So there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of things to consider. Protein is a hot topic, it has been for a few years, but I still don't think this recommendation is really helpful. Also, how many Americans do you know actually know their weight in kilos? Or know how to convert kilos to pounds? It's an easy Google search, but again, I don't think that's like particularly helpful considering we don't really use the metric system. Then we're talking about dairy, consuming full fat dairy with no added sugars. I don't really know why we are hating on low-fat dairy, like a Greek yogurt or a cottage cheese that's low-fat, or low-fat sour cream, that are still whole nutrient-dense foods that do not have any fillers added. Of course, there are some that do, but I'm talking about like the good stuff. Full-fat dairy has a lot of saturated fat and is very calorically dense, so eating the right amount of calories for you earlier, and that's not it. We'll talk about saturated fat also because it's a little bit conflicting. I don't think this dairy recommendation of eating 3 servings per day is helpful. Some folks have dairy intolerance. Some folks can have 3 servings of dairy and that's like half of their calories, their energy needs for the day. I do like that they call out fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and miso, and high fiber foods that support a diverse microbiome. This is the only mention of fiber. If we actually go down to eating vegetables and fruits throughout the day, they don't really talk about the importance of fiber or the difference between soluble fiber or insoluble fiber. And according to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, we know that Americans significantly undereat fiber, where 95% of adults do not meet the minimum requirement of daily fiber intake. Adequate fiber intake is 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories consumed. Depending on how much energy food you consume, that could be anywhere between like 25, 28 grams all the way up to like 40, 45 grams of fiber. They also don't differentiate between starchy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables, and they don't emphasize the importance of non-starchy vegetables, and they don't give examples of what a serving of vegetable looks like. A serving of veggies is about a cup of raw or chopped veggies, half a cup to a cup of cooked veggies, or 2 cups of leafy greens. Your fist is about a cup of veggies. And if you cup your hand, that little bit of cupped right here, that is half a cup. And if you hold your hands together like this, that is 2 cups. That is 2 cups of roughage, of greens. This is what I typically use with my clients without having them track, is that, okay, I gotta get like 3 fistfuls of non-starchy veggies into my day and like a cup of roughage, or a couple of cups of roughage. Next is healthy fats. All right, so they're calling out that fat is great, and fat is in fact great. We need it for hormone regulation. It is how we get our fat-soluble vitamins absorbed into our body, A, D, E, and K. And healthy fats are plentiful in the foods that they're calling out, like seafood, nuts, seeds, full-fat dairy, olives, and avocados. They also include butter and tallow here. I don't know how I feel about that. There's nothing wrong with butter and tallow. However, they don't really talk about how much to have, right? So where they talk about saturated fat specifically, they're saying that saturated fat should not exceed 10% of total daily calories. And there needs to be more research on saturated fat, and that's likely true. However, what they're saying here is that it should not exceed more than 10% of daily calories. If we go back to that inverted pyramid, we can see that their foods right at the top, steak, cheese, cheese is not a protein. Cheese is not a good source of protein. Cheese is a fat, and it has carbs, and it has protein. It has all 3 macronutrients, like nuts. And it's very calorically dense, and it's right at the freaking top. And also, most cheeses are very high in fat. Whole milk, these foods outside of like chicken and yogurt and things like that, lean yogurt, they're so high in saturated fat. So if you're telling people to consume less than 10% of their calories from saturated fat, and they're eating like butter and steak and cheese and milk, and I mean, given that you're hoping they're eating some of this as well, the veggies, but you can see how the sat fat can really get out of hand. So to me, it's a little conflicting. I could be wrong. I want to know what your thoughts are specifically on saturated fat. I'm not a saturated fat hater at all. I think it's I think it's helpful, and we do need more research on it. However, at this point, like, I am not trying to get more saturated fat into my diet. And then we're talking about focusing on whole grains, fiber-rich whole grains. Okay, we did mention there is a little bit of fiber, right? And reduce the consumption of highly processed refined carbohydrates like white bread, ready-to-eat packaged breakfast options, flour, tortillas, and crackers. However, again, it doesn't mention what are the sources of fiber-rich whole grains. What does that mean for people? Well, I know that it's probably rice and barley and quinoa and buckwheat. It's grains like that. But how do you prepare them? There are no resources, at least that I found anywhere on this website, that prepares people to learn how to make like meals out of the foods that they're recommending. And if we go back to the pyramid, it's like you should, according to them, you should consume that the least. And I agree. But 2 to 4 servings, again, if somebody's reading this like 2 to 4 servings, like that can be a lot. And that can easily kind of like skew this whole pyramid out of proportion if you're don't really understand portion sizes, which most Americans do not. Then we're moving on to alcohol. And I will say that I like this bit. I like this bit that consuming less alcohol is better for your health. Duh. They're just giving a recommendation, consume less. What does that mean? If you're drinking a 12-pack of beer a night, less might be 8 cans of beer, right? Is that better? Well, yeah, but is that like great? Is that gonna align with this better for your overall health? It's all relative. I wish they would have given a visual or, again, a chart showing what is a standard size drink. And also maybe leaving a phone number or some resources for folks that are struggling with alcohol. And the previous dietary guideline, it recommended 1 or less drink, alcoholic beverage drink for women per day, and for men, 2 or less alcoholic drinks per day. And again, like, what are the sizes, and like standard shot versus beer versus wine versus a mixed drink. There's so many different types of alcohol. Folks just don't know. They don't know. And maybe citing some helpful information of why we should strive toward limiting or minimizing our alcohol consumption would be helpful. I think I want to make a whole video on alcohol specifically. My friend and I, we run a Sober Curious group where I live, and I've been sober for like 7+ years. It's a passion of mine to share this with people. So I think I'm just gonna park that for later. But again, I don't think the USDA is really helping anyone here with these recommendations. Sodium. Yeah, I mean, that's good. Highly processed foods that are high in sodium should be avoided. Yeah, that's kind of the general theme throughout this document, is that highly processed foods should be avoided. And agreed, totally. They also call out that sodium and electrolytes are essential for function, and in general, we should consume less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. Highly active individual may benefit from increased sodium. I don't particularly think that 2,300 milligram sodium per day is really helpful if you're trying to get people to eat whole, nutrient-dense, real food. This is because, how do we know about sodium? We look at a package and it tells us how much sodium it has. But if you're buying real food and you're preparing yourself, how should you salt or season your food in order for you to not exceed that number? It doesn't address it. Then we have the special populations and considerations. It talks about infancy and early childhood. I've never worked with this population, so I can't speak to it, but it seems like solid recommendations. But again, I can't really speak to this, as well as introducing foods to infants and toddlers and childhood, and then we've got adolescence here and young adulthood, and no amount of sugar, no amount of added sugar is recommended. That's great. I think that's really helpful. Avoiding caffeinated beverages is obviously really helpful as well. Eating whole nutrient-dense foods, adequate calcium, vitamin D, all of that. Yeah, individuals with chronic disease, they do call out folks that have some certain types of chronic diseases, cardiovascular, obesity, type 2 here, but they're talking about following a low-carb diet and how it can help. And I do agree. But again, what does a low-carb diet mean? They don't talk about how it is a medical intervention. As I worked with several patients eating low-carb or keto, and it's helpful until it's not. The goal was always to find their carbohydrate threshold, their personal carbohydrate tolerance. And I think that's what we should be striving for. But again, following a low carbohydrate diet, what does that mean? What does that look like? They don't really have any sources to send the person that might be reading this with a chronic disease to like get them started eating low carb in a healthy way, how to work with your physician if you're going to adapt this diet. Because if you have type 2 diabetes and you don't talk to your healthcare provider and you're on certain types of medication and you start low carb, you can die. Like you can experience hypoglycemia and no bueno. So you should talk to your doctor. I think that should have been made like more abundantly clear here. And in the last piece of this document, they call out our vegan and vegetarian friends specifically. They talk about all of the vegan vegetarian sources of protein and limiting the vegan vegetarian junk food that's consistent with the rest of the message that they're sending, but they really call them out on potential nutrient gaps. So citing that vegetarians are often lacking in vitamin D, choline, iron, and a slew of other vitamins and minerals. And to avoid these nutrient gaps, that you need supplementation. Here's my problem with it. First, they're not wrong. Yes, vegan vegetarian diets can have these gaps in nutrition and probably do need support with supplementation, and also need proper testing to see if they are deficient in a certain nutrient, vitamin, or mineral. However, they fail to call out other fringe type diets like keto or carnivore, which can also lack in nutrients like fiber. And they don't call out that vegan or carnivores folks should get their lipid panel checked more frequently to make sure that everything's good. But I don't hate that they call this out. I think this is helpful information, but they're leaving out some other fringe diets, some just other dietary patterns that a lot of people have adopted recently, and those need to be addressed as well. So looking at the realfood.gov website, it has the Dietary Guidelines for Americans PDF. It just kind of has short explanations about what does real food mean and what about hydration and is this a strict diet? Like it kind of like one sentence types of answers that, again, they're not really helpful. And the resources that they have, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, they do have a serving size sheet. But again, I feel like it should be linked in the actual document, because how many people are going to go to this website and look at this thing specifically? It should be easily accessible. I feel like this is the most important thing to include here. All right, so these are all my thoughts on the new food pyramid, the inverted pyramid from the USDA. And yeah, that's kind of it. I don't think it's anything particularly groundbreaking. I think it has some room for improvement. Overall, it's mid. It's not great, but it does emphasize eating whole nutrient-dense foods, and there is some helpful information in this document. However, I think it does have huge opportunities in terms of resources for people to actually implement a dietary pattern that includes whole nutrient-dense foods. And that's what I'm going to try to aim to do here on this channel, is to share a lot of this information when it comes to eating whole nutrient-dense foods. And you can also check me out on Instagram as well. That's where I share a lot of that stuff too. Anyway, that should about do it for today. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!